Okay, so what was the inspiration behind Aftershock?
Well, I've been a huge fan of Nicolás's movies since his first film, Promedio Rojo, that I saw at LA Film Festival years ago. And we've been talking about doing a movie together. And he's made these great Spanish language comedies, this whole series, Que Pena Tu Vida. And I was saying, when are you going to do an English language film? And kind of, I guess it was around, we've been talking forever about figuring out a movie to collaborate on together. And while we were...
When I sent you the trailer of the first, well, Que Pena Tu Vida, they are translated as Fuck My Life. So I sent you the trailer of Fuck My Life, and I told you that I shot the whole movie with basically that camera that you're holding.
Yeah, and it looks incredible.
And he was like, how did you do that, you know? And then we start talking about we should do a movie together with that technology really, really fast. And we start pitching concepts like, okay, let's make a sci-fi horror movie. Let's make a haunted house movie. And then the earthquake happened, and I was like, we have to make a movie with the earthquake. Like, there is nothing more horrifying than that.
Once he told me what happened, it was so terrifying. We're like, we have to make a film about this. And then we realized that there had been disaster movies, but huge kind of Roland Emmerich style stuff, which I love, but they're very much about the spectacle. And we wanted to do something that was really much more like a 70s movie about the characters and do it real. Like, we didn't want any CG in the movie. We wanted to really destroy stuff and really drop things. And
it's like Deliverance meets Earthquake.
But, you know, we also wanted to do it where, you know, the first half of it actually really feels much more like Nicolás's movies, like the fun romantic comedies, and then it turns more into
Eli Roth movie. So we used to call the movie "Fuck My Hostel," you know.
But the stuff that, you know, we didn't have to invent anything. I mean, everything in the movie is stuff that really happened. I mean, Lorenza Izzo, one of our cast members, plays Kylie. It was her friend who was in the club who got his hands cut off, and both his hands were cut off. And the music was still going. Yeah,
like imagine La Macarena, you know, was playing or something like that, and everybody looking for the hand.
Because the earthquake hit at 3:30 in the morning on a Saturday.
So the last weekend of summer.
So imagine it's like, for Americans, it'd be like in August, the last weekend, everyone going crazy, the Labor Day, and then at 3:30 in the morning when everyone's drunk and in the club and having fun, it's like at the time was the biggest ever recorded earthquake.
And then the Japanese one, so whatever.
Yeah, but it's like, it just shook.
Japanese.
It shook the, you know.
It's like a drunk 2012, you know.
Yeah, you know, it shook the ground for like 3.5 minutes. People's hands got cut off. The prisons broke open. There were riots, raiding, like
looting.
Raping, looting. All that stuff really happened. There was a town where there was a tsunami warning, and people started freaking out, and then they called off the warning, and then 5 hours later, a tsunami just came out of nowhere and killed everyone.
Like, right after the earthquake, it was impossible to get a signal on your cell phone. But I was like waiting for a long time, and suddenly I started talking with my girlfriend at the time, and she was like, and she was in Valparaiso where we shot the movie, okay, and that's like 2 hours away from where I was, and she was like, I'm okay, don't worry, but I'm running to the hills. And I was like, why are you running to the hills? Because there's a tsunami warning. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, but don't worry, everything's going shh. Wow. And then radio silence for 4 hours, where I didn't know if she was alive. And then my battery died, and the only thing that was working were like the, how you say, like the phones, like the old school phones, like what is...
Landline.
Yeah, landline phone. And I was like, I need to call my mom. And then I discovered that I didn't know my mom's number. Because the movie talks about a generation that we use the technology so much that suddenly without our iPhones, we're completely lost. Yeah. Like without Twitter, without Facebook, without all of that, like I didn't know how to, like, I didn't know how to communicate with my brother. You know, when my cell phone died, it was like, it's over. You know, the only thing that was working was the AM radio that I was listening at my car. And there were aftershocks all the time during that night, and it was really hardcore. And the first thing that I thought was like, this could be a great second act for a movie, you know?
Well, we love the idea of the randomness of life, which is something Hitchcock talks about in The Birds, that everything's fine. Here we're doing this interview, and then there's an earthquake, and that's it, and you see who people really are, you know? And I liked building up the time for the minutia of the problems, that you think the biggest problem in the world is that you like this girl and some guy's dancing with her and this guy introduced her and now you're mad at him, you're mad at yourself, and you're mad, and then the earthquake happens and it's like your friend lost his hand, he might die.
Yeah, and it's funny because some of the reviews that they are out now about the movie, they talk about how much time we spent with the characters before the earthquake. And I think that that has to do because in all the movies that you see that come from the US, it's like, hi, I'm Marty. Oh no, a fucking gigantic alien, you know? And that happens in the minute 5. So you don't have character development. Any movie that is a disaster movie doesn't have character development. It's always like,
except for the 70s, right? I'm thinking
exactly.
Earthquake. You spent a
Well,
great time
that was
with
the
the
kind of
character.
movie that.
But also we thought, well, it's not more about spending time with the characters. It's also, there's a version of Latin America. When I went to Chile, I was like, whoa, it was like being in Toronto. I mean, it's a W hotel, it's Starbucks, everything's very modern. And I was like, this is not what I pictured. And I think that in movies, Latin America has been very much sort of in much more slanted towards the city of God thing. Like that's what people really think of Latin America. Yeah. So we wanted to not just have the kids, we wanted to not just have character development, but to show that, like, yeah, in Chile they have Lollapalooza, they have this, they have the, you know, they have modern clubs. It's a very, very modern city with technology, and that
and Chile's extremely hipster. Like we
call them chipsters.
Yeah,
it's crazy how hipster they are. You think you're in Silver Lake or Williamsburg. It's like that.
Yeah, it's beyond Williamsburg. Yeah.
It's like a transformation in the film from that to City of God. It kind of
Well, yeah,
they want that. That's why they want to go to. The whole thing is these guys are in Chile, and the models that have, and there's a lot of models that people go to Santiago all the time for model shoots. So the models are bored. It's like every city's the same hotels, the same music.
Yeah.
That's why they want to see the same real
music.
Chile. So they go out of their way to go to the coast, which is much more the poorer part, but it's much more authentic. That's not authentic, but it's more. You know,
but they always thought it's what we call the real Chile, and basically it's what we call like the real Latin America that everybody wants to see, you know, and that's basically the cliche. Is like, oh, let's go to the real Cuba, let's go to the real, you know, like the real Latin America where everything is so dangerous, you know, and that's the Latin America that you're used to see in movies. And we show Valparaiso that it's a place where everybody goes. That it's a very nice town, and we basically destroy it.
Yeah, but you know, just hearing, there was other things we learned that in Spain and Chile, that there were underground tunnels between the monasteries, the nunneries, where the priests and nuns would meet and have sex. And if the nun got pregnant, they disappeared and they had the baby and they buried the baby there. So there are these underground tunnels really exist.
Wow.
Yeah, so we were like, we had to use them. Yeah.
So all these different things, we didn't want to make.
We scout them for the movie, but they didn't let us shoot there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was crazy. But we went, you know, the idea wasn't ever to make a serious, you know, like Oscar type picture, like a real intense drama about that night. We said, all right, we're going to set it, because that happened before the miners, and we wanted to make jokes about the miners, and
it's not just make
references to the miners, make jokes, incorporate that.
Yeah, it's not a movie that talks about like the real earthquake, you know. It's a movie that talks about what happens to some tourists that go to Chile and suddenly there's an earthquake.
Yeah,
you know, but it's not the official earthquake movie.
We want to make a fun, popcorn, exciting, scary movie.
We had the other ones, right? What do we need to do?
Yeah, of course.
You know, we wanted something that was fun, but we wanted a movie that, like, when the turn happens, it's just nonstop. And I love the collapse of society. I'm fascinated by people being pushed to that point of insanity, even from Cabin Fever, where you go somewhere for a fun time and everything goes to hell, and you see what people are really made of. And the earthquake is such a perfect situation for that.
And it was a different way of doing a slasher film, you know? Yeah. It's like, because here, the thing is like, if there is a guy with a hockey mask, you know, trying to kill you, you're like, okay, whatever, that's not gonna happen, you know? Or if there is like, I don't know, I love Cloverfield, but a gigantic monster is not gonna appear tomorrow, you know, maybe in Tokyo, you know, but not in Toronto. So I was like, what was really scary about being in the middle of the earthquake was that everything was real. You know, like luckily nobody that was close to me died, you know, but they were like friends of friends that died, like people that were at the airport. The airport was completely destroyed, so you couldn't get a flight for like 3 days. So suddenly we were back to zero. Like we think that we are in the first world, you know, and suddenly we were back to third world. And that was really crazy.
He was telling a story about like a guy, you know, a girl he knew was on a first date with a guy.
Oh, that's
and
crazy.
Like sitting in the car, like
making out.
Earthquake happens, a rock hit and paralyzed him, broke his neck, and he couldn't move, and she had to move him to the back of the car, and then she didn't drive stick, and she had to drive the stick, jerking the car down the hill to the hospital, but there's like the roads, I mean, this was an average, this was normal. And when we were shooting it in the club, and we're all covered in blood and plaster, and it looks like those sort of post 9/11 victims, like everyone's like, yeah, this is exactly what it was like. It's not an exaggeration. We're literally like, I remember you talked to Lorenza, who plays Kylie, she's like, yeah, we had to like break out through a plate glass window to get out of the club, and people were like pushing each other, and you just had shards of glass, and everyone was so drunk, no one knew what was going on, and then no one knew what was going to happen, or when the tsunami was coming, or when the next aftershock was going to come, because it was the most powerful earthquake, you know, ever on record. So even the aftershocks would be like 6.7, 7.0.
Yeah.
And the aftershocks,
and they were every 10 minutes.
Yeah, so you're just sitting there waiting to see, and then another aftershock would happen.
So have you had any reactions from people, even while you're making the film, from people who were affected by the earthquake, who might be concerned that the film could be insensitive to them, or
no? I mean, we're not presenting it as.
Yeah, we're not presenting it as
people
that.
haven't seen the movie yet. Like,
yeah,
were
I know.
Supportive of the idea of making this movie.
Oh, very, yeah.
Yeah.
And also, people like that we were showing, you know,
like the cool
shit
part
in Latin
of
America and shit in a cool and positive way. But not only that, you know, we actually had the main critic from Santiago newspaper, who actually was not a fan of Nicolás's other movies.
like all of them.
Like really, because his movies are made really popcorn movies that are made for teenagers, and so the critics get very, you know, he's taking a beating, but his movies are hugely successful. He loved it. He's like this. He thought it was great. Thought it was fantastic. You know, even showing the dark side of human behavior.
Well, that's something that I was wondering about. For me, some of the worst things that happen in the film are because of the dark side of humanity. Was that purposeful, that almost that overshadows some of the disaster of the actual earthquake?
Yeah, totally.
That's
it's
what's
what people
terrifying.
do. Like there were people. What happened in Chile is that there were people looting, and they were at the beginning they were, you know, taking things to eat or whatever. But then you see people with like big TVs, you know, and like people stealing stuff.
I watch a lot of disaster movies, a lot of earthquakes.
We talk a lot about Cloverfield in a way. For me, was a movie that I really like. In terms that it's something that was a movie that never stopped, you know. Also, I think that there is a huge influence from video games, you know, of making this sandbox experience, you know, where you could go everywhere, you don't know what's gonna happen next, you know. It has that too, you know. So Grand Theft Auto, in a way, I think that it's one of the influence of the movie.
Lovely. Okay, thanks everyone.